Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. We're just going to allow a couple of minutes for people to join the session. And the session you've joined today is the Renewable Energy Purchasing webinar. It's PPAs and Community Benefits Training for Councils and Businesses. Some of you might have attended some of our sessions. We ran 7 face-to-face sessions in Queensland regional areas throughout November. Now we're doing the first of the online sessions today. So hope you enjoy it. My name's Jackie McEwen. I'm the Program Director at the Business Renewables Centre Australia. And I'll be taking you through this next hour and a half. So hopefully you've grabbed a little bit of lunch and you'll be able to join in. We will also have space for questions today, not a huge space because it is just an hour and a half. But we've got a Q&A function as you normally do in Zoom. You can jump on there and ask questions. The chat function I think probably isn't enabled for this format today, but just ask questions in the Q&A and we will try and get to those as we go. If we don't get to them during the session, we'll hopefully get to them during the question and answer session at the end. And then we will, if there are any left over, we can come back to you directly as well. So just allow a few more minutes for people to join our session today. Thanks. Thanks everyone for joining. If you're just joining now, it's just after 1 o'clock in Sydney and 12 o'clock in Queensland time. And we're just going to be starting our webinar very shortly on renewable electricity purchasing for businesses and councils. And this work is funded, this webinar is funded, as is the program that we're delivering by Queensland Treasury. Under the Strategic Energy Partnerships program. We've got some great speakers today who I'll introduce shortly. We will record today's session, so if some of your colleagues might be interested in the content of today, you'll be able to access that and send it to them, which is great. This session, if you have joined our face-to-face sessions, will be quite similar. We have 2 guest speakers as well today. If you missed Lion Breweries, we have Tamara Sling-Ronan coming. She's Environment Director there at Lion. She'll be joining us. We also have Daniel Strongrove from Cairns Regional Council. And today we have also Sebastian Burres from Queensland Treasury. And he'll be jumping in shortly to tell you a little bit about that program. So we might actually launch in and get started. For those of you who missed it, I'm Jackie McEwen and I'm Program Director here at the Business Renewables Centre Australia. And I'm here with my team to talk to you today about community benefits and PPAs. So how to make your electricity purchase work for you in terms of cost, as well as sustainability and regional community outcomes. Today on the call, just before we get going, I've also got one of our technical directors, John Prendergast. You might want to wave there, John. If you can see John, there we are. And I also have Bridget Weston, our project officer, who some of you might have met when we visited your regional area recently. So thanks very much for joining. Ask any questions you would like via the Q&A function. So every week, more and more organisations, public and private, large and small, are looking at buying renewable electricity, motivated by a range of different drivers, particularly cost, sustainability and community drivers. So before I launch into this session with the group here, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we're all based today, and pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. For us here in Sydney, it's the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. So just a really quick bit about us. We are an independent training, connection and fundamental how-to resources initiative. So we've been around for about 7 years now. We were established with funding support from ARENA, Queensland, Vic and New South Wales governments. And we are, as I say, independent and not-for-profit. And we're really here to help organisations to learn how to purchase renewable electricity for their organisation, whether you're public or private, and particularly to support industry decarbonisation and the energy transition. You can jump on our website either now or a little bit later, probably a little bit later might be better, or you miss the slides. And you can have a look at our various guides and templates. We also do a lot of training. We provide connection, particularly through our face-to-face events, but also through direct connection through ourselves. We have consultants lists and markets and policy information, all supporting renewable energy purchasing for business and government organisations. So please feel free to take a look at that. I'd like to thank Queensland Treasury in particular for supporting us and for supporting this project. We are doing 10 sessions all in all for introductory workshops, and we'll also be doing a boot camp and a guide, and I'll come back to those resources a little bit later. They're specific to Queensland market. Little snapshot there of our team. The next slide there, Bridget. So what are we going to do today? So today, we'll firstly hear from Seb about the Queensland Government's Strategic Partnerships Project. And then we're going to hear a little bit about why companies do PPAs, who's doing them, and what are they all about. Then we'll hear from Jonathan about the different types of PPAs. Why does your size of energy usage matter? And a little bit about group buying as well. Then we'll hear from Daniel Strongrove from Cairns Regional Council in our first industry presentation to hear a little bit about their PPA, why they did it and how they did it. A little bit more then on size, and then we'll dive into how to deliver community benefits through PPAs. So how are these two concepts linked and how can you deliver one through the other? Then we're going to hear our second industry presentation, and that's going to be from Tamara Sling-Ronan, Environment Director at Lion Breweries. And then we'll have Q&A and a little bit on what's next. So I'll hand over now to Sebastian Burris. He is Manager of Community Benefits in the Strategic Energy Partnerships team at Queensland Treasury. Thanks very much, Seb.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Jackie, for the warm introduction. And thank you for BRC-A for organizing this training today. My name is Sebastian Burris and I work as a program manager here at Queensland Treasury. Like to provide you with a brief background and of how and why we came to partner with BRC-A to deliver this training. But first up, I'd also like to make an acknowledgement to country. I'm coming to you from Meanjin, Brisbane, the land of the Turrbal and Yagara people. Let's start with how we got here. So throughout 2023, that was back then as the Department of Energy and Climate, were out and about engaging with regional communities. We hosted 18 regional roadshows, over 50 briefings and workshops across the state, and we received more than 1,500 survey responses, 200 written submissions. We had almost 60,000 website visits, and we had 400 new email subscribers. The 6 key themes that have emerged during this engagement throughout Queensland was that communities want to engage early, directly, and more often. They saw really a need for more boots on the ground. Second one is the regional benefit sharing. We heard that to make the transition work, it's essential to deliver long-term benefits, in particular for smaller communities. The third point is that emerged was the equitable distribution of lasting benefits. We heard that fairness plays an important role for regional Queenslanders. The message that we got there was don't create winners and losers. Next was unlock local opportunities. There's a need for local buying targets and investing in supply chain mapping. Better protection for cultural heritage and provide more opportunities for First Nations was another key message that we received. And sixth, provide more training to develop local capacity and build resilience. Next slide, please. One way we are putting these insights into action is through our Strategic Energy Partnerships program. Our goal here is to actively collaborate with communities to secure and improve social license for the energy transition. This slide shows the key objectives of this program. To get there, we have partnered with 10 organizations. One such partnership is with BRC-A. Other examples of our partnerships are that we're working with the Queensland Farmers Federation. We heard from farmers during the engagement that they want more information on how renewable energy generation projects can benefit their businesses. And QFF have developed an information resources targeted at landholders. We call it the Landholder Toolkit, and it's for them to have further information on what it takes to really host wind and solar farms on their land. QFF also hosts a phone service where farmers receive tailored energy-related information. We have partnered with the Clean Energy Council, and they have hosted 3 clean energy job fairs in regional Queensland, promoting the new clean energy jobs that pop up in the regions. And we heard community concerns about the lack of solar panel recycling facilities. We have partnered with the Smart Energy Council to develop a large-scale solar panel recycling pilot throughout Queensland. And another example is that we heard from environmental groups that they want to improve the environmental outcomes of renewable energy projects. So we are working with the Queensland Conservation Council to develop a methodology on how to measure and improve the outcomes of such projects. Next slide, please. Importantly, and that's why you're here, regional councils have a key role to play in the transition and in supporting their communities. This slide shows our high-level objectives in partnering with councils through the Strategic Energy Partnerships program. We are working with the LGAQ to equip Queensland councils most in need with the tools and skills to benefit from the energy transition. And yes, you've guessed it, we've partnered with BRC-A to develop PPA program and a guide, but I think Jackie will outline that a bit further later on. And we are working with an external partner to provide and develop a social license and energy toolkit for councils. The goal here is to equip you with the necessary tools and knowledge to engage effectively with developers and maximize community benefits from renewable infrastructure developments. But before I pass over to BRC-A, a short promotion of our work. Before the election, the then government, next slide. Thank you very much, Bridget. Before the election, the then government released the draft renewables regulatory framework. The current government has extended the consultation period until 1st of February 2025. And we'd like to hear from you. So if you could scan that code there, that brings you to the page and opens the document as well. At the heart of the framework is the question, do we have the right regulatory framework to ensure communities are supported and their needs addressed while transitioning to an energy system underpinned by a growing share of renewable energy? So the purpose here is to provide a coordinated action across government and better alignment of engagement, communication, regulation, assessment, and approvals, and to build on existing initiatives to support strong and sustainable energy communities across Queensland. Next slide, please. And with that short introduction, I'd like to pass you over into the capable hands of BRC-A, who know far more about PPA than I do. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for that, Seb. It's such a fantastic program and we're really excited to be part of it. Everyone jump on there and participate in the consultation. It's a great opportunity to be part of the transition. So what is a corporate PPA and who is doing them and why? So just next slide. So before we jump into that, I guess it's really important to understand your energy management options. So we encourage organisations to really start with your energy usage. Energy efficiency is a bit of a no-brainer. There are a lot of initiatives and resources out there available, both through the Queensland government, but also through the Energy Efficiency Council and a range of other organisations. So reducing that energy use, first of all, is a really great step in managing your energy. Secondly, most organisations are going to look at rooftop. It's Queensland, you have a huge amount of rooftop solar, of course. It won't be news to you that that's a very popular next step for organisations as well as individuals to have a look at. You've reduced your amount of energy that you're using, then you're going to have a look at what you could do, either ground-mounted solar or rooftop solar to get you there. So that'll often bring you to around about sort of 30% of your electricity load, obviously depending on what time of day you use electricity in your business. A battery as well might get you a little bit further along. There are some, I guess, some commercial challenges out there, but some batteries getting more feasible nowadays as well. So that might bring you more up to sort of that 50% of your load being renewable, perhaps, maybe even 60. So what do you do with the rest? So looking at new local renewables. So this is where PPAs come in. This is where you start to look at how can you access off-site local renewables. And by local, we generally mean within your state. And then finally, some organisations, some of you out there might be looking at renewable energy certificates or LGCs, large-scale generation certificates, as an option. So we're going to talk to you about PPAs, that yellow circle in the middle. Next slide. So before we get started, we'll run a really quick poll. Just understand who we've got and where your renewable electricity experience lies. So you might be totally new to renewable energy procurement, and that's absolutely fine. This is an introductory session. You might be looking at investigating options of what might best work for your organisation. You could be tendering. You might already be out to tender or negotiating with a counterparty. Maybe you've already executed a contract, in fact, for either large-scale generation certificates or green power, or maybe even for a PPA. So if you can jump on there and click, it's anonymous. It's really just for us to get a little bit of an idea for that spread of knowledge and experience in the room. Thanks very much. Bridget, I'll just hand it over to you there to tell us how we went or how the numbers looking.
We have a mix for each section. The majority of people here, though, are investigating their options or are totally new to renewable energy. So, yeah.
Perfect. That's great. All right. Fantastic. Thanks, everyone, for participating in that quick poll. We've got another couple of quick polls later just to, or coming up shortly, just to pre-warn you about participating in those if you'd like to. So what is a PPA? A PPA is simply a contract between an energy buyer and an energy seller whereby there's a guarantee that the energy being purchased is from a renewable energy source, that is a solar or a wind farm, generally speaking. But importantly, it differs from your current electricity contract in that there is an agreed amount of electricity at an agreed price and for an agreed period of time. So I'll come back to a little bit more about what they do. But let's have a look now at who's doing PPAs. Next slide, thanks, Bridget. So this year, 2024, has been the biggest year ever for corporate PPAs. There've been some really, really large PPAs you can see there. Now, this graphic is available on our website. It's actually a really nice interactive graphic. You can hover over those little bars there and see every company's name that's done a PPA over 5 gigawatt hours per annum. So you can see those big red, all the red bars there. If you're on a smaller screen, are all the Queensland PPAs, Blues New South Wales. We've got, I think, Vic in black, SA in yellow, a few mixed state ones there as well. Large companies, obviously in Queensland, you will have heard of BHP, Rio Tinto, Sun Metals, Anglo American, Telstra did their Queensland one, AMP Capital, a whole bunch of others. More recently also, North Queensland Airports Group did a PPA. So lots and lots of PPAs being done year on year. Queensland's also the leading state for PPAs at the moment, in fact, and by a really significant amount. You can see there in that graphic, having a look by state, Queensland is well ahead in terms of total capacity contracted, and also for last year. So it's not the first year. So there's a real trend forming there for a lot of activity in the Queensland market. Next slide, Bridget. So who's doing them? On the right there, we've got a little graphic that shows you various industries who are particularly active in this space. So unsurprisingly, we've got the resources and heavy industry in that big yellow bar, followed by IT. They use a lot of energy, retail and hospitality, followed by the built environments, a very capable and very competitive sector, and then followed by a number of others. So just some companies on the left there you'll be familiar with, industrial and manufacturing sector. You've got Orica, BlueScope, some other really big names there. Molycop, who we'll talk to a little bit later. In the agriculture and food sector, really right throughout the supply chain, we've got everyone from the primary producers, such as Borough Foods and Aussie fruit growers, fruits, etc., right through the production process and into the retailing at the other end. Woolies, Coles, Aldi have all done PPAs. Mining, it's a no-brainer. Very large energy users have used PPAs to obviously turn renewable, but also to lock in some green hedging there on electricity pricing. Local government, there's been a lot of local government PPAs nationally. Cairns Regional Council, who we'll hear from today, Sunshine Coast Council also with the Valdora Solar Farm, and obviously also some large groups of councils. So the Central New South Wales Joint Organisation of 11 regional councils, and a large groups in Sydney and New South Wales and Victoria throughout. Another one announcing the other day in the Hunter and the Mid-North Coast JOs of New South Wales. So we've got some 99% now of Victorian councils have done a PPA and 75% in New South Wales. So quite compelling statistics there. Universities, lots of universities, some large assets there, so also lend themselves well to PPAs. But PPAs are also for smaller organisations, and we'll come back to that shortly. We also see other industries and utilities getting in on PPAs and contracting there. Next slide. So it's really important to understand why both sides of the equation will do a PPA. Why are the energy buyers and the energy sellers interested? So from an energy seller's perspective, PPAs provide project finance. They are a bankable contract that developers can use to obtain finance to go and build a solar or a wind farm. And this is really what's happened in the really large first PPAs that have happened. And this is a really important element now of the PPA market. Corporate PPAs have become a very important part of that sort of funding source for new projects together with utility PPAs. But why are they important to you as a buyer, more importantly for this group? And that's really for three reasons. We find three kind of peak reasons why organisations do it. In fact, we survey industry every year to find out why they're doing PPAs. These are the top reasons each year. So achieving environmental sustainability targets, a lot of organisations are either setting a goal, have set a goal, or are thinking about doing one to reduce their emissions. So carbon emissions, and particularly, obviously, a PPA takes care of your scope 2 emissions, that's electricity. But a lot of organisations are looking also at their scope 1 emissions, how they can electrify some of their processes and bring some of that into scope 1 and wrap that up in a PPA, such as electric vehicles, maybe transitioning their fleet across to EVs. But also scope 3 and looking at talking to their suppliers or their clients, looking up and down that supply chain, that value chain, and looking at how they can work with their counterparties to decarbonise their activities as well. Another really important reason is managing energy price fluctuations. So PPAs can help to deliver budget certainty. And we know that this is important for businesses looking at the current, I guess, the past fluctuations in electricity prices that are pretty unpleasant to deal with for a lot of organisations. And then finally, delivering social, environmental and economic benefits. So this is where PPAs with projects in regional areas can actually make a positive contribution to those regional communities. And it's another driver we've been noticing increasing significantly for corporates out there. Next slide. So how does it work in achieving your sustainability targets? On the left-hand side of the graphic there, you might be measuring your electricity or scope 2 emissions. You might be starting to understand what they are. You might have a little bit of rooftop solar and maybe that brings those emissions down a little. You might be doing some energy efficiency measures and implementing those, bringing that energy efficiency down again. But you might also say have a bit more demand. Maybe you've acquired a new site or have some new operations. So what you're left with is these remaining emissions, which one off-site PPA can cover in just one single contract. So they can be very quick in terms of being able to deliver that reduction. Next slide. As I mentioned, they also help to deliver budget certainty. If you have a standard retail electricity contract that might be running for 1 to 3 years or on progressive purchasing, that price will bump around as the electricity market moves around as well. However, if you have a PPA there, in this case, that's that blue line going across the screen there. Maybe it's an 8-year or more PPA. You'll know what that price is going to be that you're going to be paying for the life of that contract. So that gives you that certainty. You can report that. That's very appealing, particularly for organisations like councils. Next slide. And we know that that's important because we expect volatility to continue as we progress through the energy transition. So as we transition away from coal, on the left there you can see this is a timeline of expected coal-fired generator closures, power station closures across the national electricity market. And so every time that happens, the price bumps around quite a bit. And we see that that's one of the, I guess, the key domestic factors that impacts on those volatile electricity prices. And they're planned closures. They can come forward or be pushed out, again, making the market a little bit more unpredictable. On the right there, we've got a graphic showing an extreme price event there that happened in 2022 that no one really predicted in the market. At that stage, we had some international factors as well, bumping in. International factors such as war in Europe, war in Middle East, etc., can also heavily impact electricity prices. And then finally, on the next slide, Some of you might be familiar with this graphic. These are the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Some of you might be looking at these as part of your organisation's sustainability strategy, or your sustainability manager might be looking at these and how you might be able to achieve some of these through your work. And the PPA gives you the opportunity to look at some of these in terms of the social, environmental, and economic benefits for regions. So just on the next slide there, we've got another little exercise. So if you want to jump in, we've got another poll that will pop up on your screen. What's important for your business? Why are you looking at renewable electricity? Do you have a directive from the top? That can be a fantastic reason to go ahead with it. In fact, a directive and you need to do it anyway. Maybe you have some net zero commitments or carbon reduction goals. Maybe you want to be an industry leader. Maybe your particular industry hasn't really done a lot in this space as yet. Maybe you just want to manage costs. And that's certainly a very important reason. Staff engagement's another one. Some organisations are really keen to go green and engage their staff through a range of sustainability initiatives, particularly where they can link that to a specific project or solar farm or wind farm. And then keeping up with the competition. So if you want to select maybe the two that are most important to you. And I'll let Bridget give us a little report on what's important to this group.
Yeah, so overwhelmingly, net zero commitments are the most important, closely followed by managing costs.
Fantastic. That's great, and closely reflects what we tend to see each time when we survey industry to find out what their main reasons are. Bridget, we'll skip the next one just in the interests of time, and I'm going to just jump ahead now and introduce John Prendergast, who is our Technical Director at Business Renewable Centre, and he's going to tell us a little bit about the different options available. Thanks, JP.
Thanks, Jackie. Thanks, Bridget. And we do have a question, and luckily it gets answered during this little section. So, and the question is around how do purchasing LGCs compare to these PPA options for decarbonisation? What are the positive and negatives of each? So I promised to get to that in my section. So here are the key renewable energy purchasing options. You can see these tiles if you fill in our diagnostic tool online, where you put in a couple of details about your organisation, and it tells you what are your most likely options and preferred options. And you get more information on each of those options. So there's for smaller and medium buyers, there's on-site renewables or switching to a green retailer with 100% green power. There's LGCs, like that question just asked, retail PPAs and wholesale PPAs, and aggregation. So forming a group and buying an aggregated PPA that was similar. Next slide. So in terms of the PPA types, we have retail PPAs on the left and wholesale PPAs on the right. I'll start with the wholesale PPA. That's where the buyer has a direct contract with a wind or solar farm. So they go direct, run a procurement process and sign a PPA with a wind or a solar farm, and they pay a fixed price for the energy produced, or at least their share of that energy produced. And in return, they receive back the market price and the LGCs. So they pay a fixed price, the renewable energy project supplies into the grid and sends that market price back and the renewable energy certificates back to the corporate buyer. It does this through a contract for difference, and we'll show that in subsequent slides. On the left, we have a retail PPA, and these are less direct. You go via a retailer, but they're simplified. So you sign up with a retailer like AGL or Origin, and they sign the PPA with the wind or solar farm and manage all that relationship with the wind and solar farm. The wind and solar farm supplies electricity into the grid, and the retailer gets that electricity via the grid and supplies it to you as the corporate buyer. So you sign up fixed price. It might be peak, shoulder, and off-peak prices. It's much more like a normal electricity agreement, just longer, and has this relationship with renewable energy, including renewable energy certificates. Next slide. So wholesale PPAs or CFDs, contracts for difference, they're directly with the wind or solar farm. They're separate to your electricity bill or your physical consumption of energy. They're variable volume, so linked to production, and they're priced as a swap. So you pay a fixed price and receive the floating or variable price. And they're generally greater than 10 years. The transaction costs can be lower by avoiding negotiations with retailers and keeping things a little more simpler in terms of selection and negotiation. They're generally suited to buyers with larger buyers with load greater than 50 gigawatt hours per annum. And these can be used to finance new wind and solar farms, although that is also true to retail PPA. So it's more about how you do it than the type of contract. And the contract sits separately from your retail supply contract. So you still need your normal electricity contract. So if you currently tender that every 2 to 3 years, you still need to keep doing that while you have this wholesale PPA sitting on the side at the same time. So I mentioned how they're a contract for difference. So see this horizontal line, I'm colorblind, it could be orange or green, I'm not entirely sure, but it's flat. That represents the fixed price. So if
It's
they
green.
it's green, thank you.
Yep, that's
They
all
make
right.
a megawatt hour. It's good to have some interaction. So if they make the wind or solar farm makes a megawatt hour, you pay them that fixed price. It might be say $75 per megawatt hour. Sometimes the wholesale price is higher than that. Say in this first month here with the arrow pointing there, just say it's $100 per megawatt hour. In that case, because it's higher than the fixed price, as a buyer, you receive those overs, that profit, the $25 per megawatt hour, 100 minus 75. But in the next month or the next year, the wholesale price might be lower. It might be $50 per megawatt hour, in which case you have to pay $25. So the buyer pays when there's unders. And that means that the wind or solar farm gets more revenue certainty. It knows how much it gets per megawatt hour, per month, per year. And that makes it bankable, so it can go and get financing, get construction happening. So in this way, it's contract for difference. Next slide. An example of this is Newcrest Mining. So they have a mine in Orange, Cadia Valley gold mine, and it uses a very large amount of electricity. And as part of their mandate to switch to renewables, they signed a wholesale PPA with Tilt Renewables and the 450 megawatt, I think it is, Rye Park Wind Farm, which is just north of Yass in New South Wales. So Orange also being in New South Wales. Their quote at the time was, "This is a critical step in our transition to sustainable energy use at our operations. As part of our climate change policy released last June, we have committed to a significant reduction in emissions intensity, and this agreement is a major step towards delivering on that objective." So you can see that this was first and foremost a sustainability initiative by Newcrest and their Cadia mine, possibly due to shareholder and global expectations on emissions. And Dion Campbell, the CEO of Tilt Renewables, said at the time, the long-term offtake agreement with Newcrest would underpin the investment decision for its largest wind farm to date. So that PPA helped the finance of that new wind farm in New South Wales. Next slide. On to retail PPAs. In this case, a retailer acts as the intermediary between the buyer and the renewable energy project. It's integrated into your electricity bill and connected to the physical consumption of energy. They're generally 5 to 10 years in term, and the costs vary with the level of firming. For example, there's models where for 5 or 10 years, your prices are fully fixed for that period. Sometimes there's repricing and partial firmness, and other times there's a wholesale price exposure where you become a wholesale customer paying the variable price, firmed up with wind and solar, but still some variability. They're generally suited to buyers with a load greater than 5 gigawatt hours, but we have seen them down to 1 gigawatt hour or even lower. And it replaces your retail supply contract for the portion of the electricity that you contract. Next slide. Next, a couple of case studies. So there's Pernod Ricard winemakers. They went 100% renewables in 2009, signing a retail PPA with Flow Power. That was supported by a solar farm and a wind farm as part of that retail PPA. Also, Molycop in Australia, a large manufacturer using over 100 gigawatt hours. Actually, that wasn't all of their demand, so that's just a portion of a very large customer. They use Flow Power for a 10-year deal with supply from Bowman Solar Farm and Sapphire Wind Farm, and a spot exposed retail PPA, and it covers 50% of their New South Wales electricity consumption. And I think my final slide is next. And finally, Burra Foods. They're a dairy ingredient processor based outside of Melbourne, actually, down near Leongatha towards Gippsland, signing up with Flow Power in a 10-year deal. Annual savings in excess of 20% based on this longer-term retail PPA compared to their normal electricity bills. And 90% of Burra Foods' energy supplied by renewable energy sources in this PPA. So in terms of that question about how LGCs compare, you still have to buy your electricity elsewhere if you only do LGC, so they keep your 2 to 3 year tenders, whereas a retail PPA can replace that. Often combining the purchase of energy and LGCs as well gets a lower combined price, either directly from the wind or solar farm or via the retail PPA. But buying LGCs separately can be beneficial for flexibility reasons. For example, if you're in an embedded network or the energy procurement is organised by another team in your organisation, and LGCs can be purchased directly by the sustainability team in that way. Back to you. Oh,
Fantastic.
Yeah,
Thanks.
you go, Jackie.
No, that's great. Fantastic. Thanks so much for that, Jonathan. Hopefully, that answered your question, anonymous attendee. But feel free to pop it back in if not. So yeah, just handing over now to Daniel Strongrove, Energy Management and Sustainability Advisor at Cairns Regional Council. Thanks very much, Daniel.
Thanks very much, Jackie. So yeah, I'm just going to be discussing the learnings from our experience in making the transition to renewable energy, which we've been on for over a decade now. So next slide. So in 2022, Council released and endorsed its climate change strategy for 2030. Now, one of our key commitments in that was that council electricity would be supplied from 100% renewable energy. And in order for council to be willing to make that commitment, we needed to know that there was actually a cost-effective and practical method to achieve that. And I'd already done a lot of work behind the scenes, and we're actually at the point in the process of going out to market tendering for a PPA type arrangement. So we knew that that was achievable, and hence we were willing to make that commitment. And that, I guess, the environmental driver was very strong for our organisation because of community sort of pressure on us to be taking action in response to climate change. So next slide. So in terms of how we use electricity, our total load there is over 35,000 megawatt hours a year, which is 35 gigawatts. And so we're kind of one of those sort of mid sort of size customers. Our consumption is costs us over $9.2 million in that particular year. Obviously that varies every year depending on prices, but electricity is very expensive for us. And so the price certainty factor was also very important for our organisation, because what we'd see from year on year is that the prices can fluctuate by $1 million from one year to the next. So next slide. And also, we also consume a significant portion of fuel, costing us around $2 million a year. And we're looking to look at options to electrify in the future, so that we can also source that from renewable energy. Okay, next slide. So in terms of our renewable energy journey, we've installed a lot of behind the meter solar. So here's our first solar system that was noteworthy. It was like less than a kilowatt. It cost $15,000, and it took two guys 2 days to install it. And that was back in 2007 when this sort of thing was very new. Fortunately, solar panel prices have come down a lot since then. So our largest solar system, next picture, next slide. You just click through. Yeah, there you go. You can see one of our largest solar systems, which is a ground mount solar system that's over 600 kilowatts. And you can also see some roof mounted solar at that site too. So that's our largest energy consuming site, the Southern Wastewater Treatment Plant. And that solar system is able to provide about 30% of the requirements of that plant and save a significant amount of money. So in total, next slide, Bridget. In total, we now have over 3 megawatt of solar installed behind the meter, and that's saving us roughly $1 million a year, depending upon current electricity prices. Next slide. So at this point in time, we have about 10% of electricity being supplied by behind the meter solar, but the question is, what about the other 90%? So we did look at a range of options. We looked at waste to energy. In the corner of that picture on the left, you can actually see sort of grassy paddock, which is actually a closed landfill where we're capturing and flaring landfill gas. And we did look at options to generate electricity from that. We've also considered a large-scale solar farm on that site. We also have opportunities for micro hydro from our catchments, which are high up the hill. But all of those things came with a lot of cost and risk, and it didn't really stack up financially as attractively as an offsite PPA. So next one. So we started really in earnest on this journey back in 2017 when there was a wind farm built locally to us. And I looked at options to procure electricity from that, but all the electricity was signed up with an offtake agreement to Ergon. And Ergon did offer to sell us LGCs only from that wind farm, but that was going to come at an additional cost of about $1 million a year on top of what we're already paying. So around that point in time, there was a few local governments, such as the Sunshine Coast Council and the Melbourne City Council, that were involved with PPA projects, and so certainly became very aware of the options for local government to sort of consider this option. Now, this is only goes back to 2023, so it doesn't show the last really big year of consumption. But in that graph there, you can actually see Cairns were a tiny little dot in the year 2022 when we signed our agreement. So obviously this has gained a lot of momentum, this option recently. So next slide. The other thing we became highly aware of is that the cost of renewables was steadily declining. So even back in 2017, the cost of electricity from renewable sources was less than fossil sources. So my question was, well, how can we access that? Because the idea of paying a premium of $1 million a year for LGCs on top of what we're already paying seemed counterintuitive, given that the renewable energy was actually cheaper. And so that's where we realized that we really needed to enter into a PPA type arrangement to be able to access that low cost renewable energy. Next slide. So we also began in earnest to do a lot of initial research. That map, that picture there you can see on the right is taken from the Queensland government's energy generation map. And that actually shows all the existing projects and future proposed projects to provide electricity into the Queensland network. And so looking at that map, I was able to see that there are a few projects proposed in our region. So we realized that if we were to sort of go to market, it was likely we would be able to find an agreement that was securing locally produced energy, which is also important to us. We wanted to be able to sort of tick that economic box of buying local and supporting the local renewable energy transition. So we also undertook a comparative rates assessment and feasibility study and did some model options assessment with the support of a consultant. And that made it, indicated that it was attractive from a financial point of view to also enter into a PPA. And then in 2019, we joined the BRC-A and I attended the first boot camp, which was fantastic. And I'll give that a great plug. If you're interested in knowing more about this, you really should attend the boot camp, which Jackie will tell you about coming up next year. And in undertaking this sort of background work, I was able to, an important point was that I kept our CEO and CFO and the procurement managers and other people in the organization, I could have kept them in the loop and educated them along the way. So when it came to the point that we went to market, everybody understood why we're doing this, what the potential risks and benefits were, and it really smoothed the whole process. So we also undertook a market sounding in 2020, and we basically engaged with 6 retailers to find out what they could offer us. And this was a rapidly maturing space. So what we saw in terms of offers back in 2020 was quite different to what we saw when we eventually went to market in 2022. Okay, next slide. So when we're talking about procuring renewable energy via PPA, what we're talking about is the portion of the wholesale electricity, and that will come at a fixed or sort of known price. There'll be retail charges associated with that if you're entering into a retail PPA. And then also you're buying the LGCs, which is the environmental charges. And those, by buying them through a PPA, you can basically fix those potentially, depending on your arrangement. But what the retailer will do is just pass through the network and distribution costs, so that they're not impacted by the PPA unless you're with Ergon. So if you're with Ergon, then you're receiving prices that have been subsidised under the Queensland Government's Community Service Obligation subsidy. And if you move away from Ergon to a different retailer, then the transmission costs passed through to you will be the actual real costs associated with Ergon network, which may differ to what you're currently paying under the arrangement with Ergon Retail. So next slide. So just something to be aware of is there's two factors that impact the network costs. One is whether or not you're on the East Coast or if you're further inland. And the other thing is which transmission zone you're in, which is the blue, the orange, and the red zones. So up in Cairns, we're in the red zone, which is transmission zone 3, but we're on the East Coast. So we're in region 3 East. Now, the costs up and down the eastern coast there used to be some difference between Southeast Queensland and where we are, which was because most of the generation was actually happening down the southeast, but that has changed. And so now there's not that much differential on the East Coast. And they're going to proposing next year, they'll actually get rid of those transmission zones in the East Coast. So if you're anywhere in the East Coast, you'll be paying the same for your network costs. So, however, if you're in the Western areas, electricity network costs will be much higher. And so that may have an impact on the financial viability of a PPA for you. So that's something you need to look into. Okay, next slide. So one of the things I sort of presented to our organisation was just to sort of make them aware of the historical cost variability we've been paying under the Ergon QCA regulated tariffs, and also what was the cause of that variability. So you can see that the wholesale energy cost in blue is the most variable cost component over the last few years. And whereas the network costs have been sort of a bit more stable. Also, the large-scale generation certificates have been quite variable. So if those energy costs and LGC costs can be fixed, then that really means we can have a lot more price certainty moving forward. So next slide. Okay, and so then the reason for that energy cost variability is the underlying wholesale energy costs. And this is going back quite a long way to see how wholesale electricity prices in Queensland have varied. And you can see, like around in 2017, there was one price spike of up to just $194 on average for electricity, and that was due to the Hazelwood power station closing, and that fed through to our retail bill the next year in a higher retail cost for the energy. But then the really big the big one on the very right is, but that was early 2022, when we had two things. We had the Ukraine war pushing up the cost of energy globally, and also the Kallo power station failed, and there was a big jump in electricity prices in Queensland. That has settled down since then. It's closer now to the 100 mark. Next slide. And the other major change that in terms of electricity market you need to be aware of is the way the cost of electricity in the wholesale market has changed at different times of day. So some people may be familiar with it in the past. You might choose to be on an off-peak tariff where electricity was cheaper at night. That's now flipped. Electricity costs are now lowest in the middle of the day when there's an excess of solar energy being fed into the grid. And also all those people who have solar are not consuming during the middle of the day. And so now the electricity prices are really spiking in the evening when the sun's set, and that sort of shortfall then needs to be filled through gas-fired power, which tends to be very expensive. So I'll explain why that's important to understand with the next couple of slides. So through our sort of research, what we came to understand was that a retail PPA was really the only appropriate option for a local government. And so we'd have to go to a new electricity retailer. And what would be happening in that arrangement is that they would be sitting in the middle and they would actually sign a PPA for purchasing renewable energy at fixed prices from various sources. And then what we would sign with the retailer would actually be an electricity supply agreement. And so what the retailer needs to know is, how do we consume electricity? Because when they were then deciding, how much it's going to cost to provide electricity to us, they would look at our electricity consumption profile throughout the day and throughout the year. And they would look at where the electricity might come from a renewable energy project, and see where there's a match. So at times of day when we need electricity and it can be supplied from a renewable energy project, that's where it comes from. And the cost of that electricity will be at a fixed price. But where we don't have a match, the retailer will have to purchase electricity from the wholesale market, and that firming energy the pricing of that can be quite volatile. So next slide. So one of the sort of important steps that I needed to undertake before we went out to market was to be able to supply the retailers with information about how we use electricity. And that information came from smart meters, which are a digital meter. Smart meter is a digital meter with communications, so that you can download the information from it. You can take, what I've done here is I took the information from our largest sites and I aggregated it to give an aggregate total load profile that shows the way we as council use electricity for every half-hour increment of the year. And this is showing you sort of the average monthly load consumption. So you can see that the way we use electricity from month to month is fairly consistent in terms of the shape. There's a peak in the evening, which aligns with that expensive time of day. And that's due to street lights turning on and wastewater treatment plants that are cranking up when people get home and start flushing toilets. And the other thing that you'll note here is that the January consumption is considerably higher, because that was the month before we turned on our large ground mount solar systems. So when we turned on those large solar systems, we could see an immediate dip during the middle of the day. And so it's important when you go to the retailer to also understand what are you going to do in terms of putting on your own solar, because that will impact the sort of your load shape which will then impact the price you get from your retailer. Okay, next slide. So one of the important things for us was to understand our load shape. So then we actually also understood where we wanted to purchase electricity from. So you see here we have the blue line, which is our council load shape. And if we were to be purchasing that volume of electricity from the solar farm, then the grey shows the area under that shows you the volume of electricity that would have to be purchased. And you can see we have a significant oversupply in the middle of the day when we don't need it. And the retailer would, if they'd bought that volume of electricity, would then have to actually sell that in the wholesale market. And they might be getting potentially negative prices, because that's the electricity prices can be quite low in the middle of the day in Queensland. On the other hand, they're going to have to purchase electricity from the wholesale market when the sun's not shining. And that electricity, as I mentioned, can be quite expensive and the price can be volatile. On the other hand, we had information about the wind generation profile from a local wind farm. And so we knew that the way the local wind farms generate electricity is that they tend to sort of lull a bit in the middle of the day, but then they ramp up in the evening, which was a perfect sort of match to the way we use electricity. So getting a good consumption to generation match just provides a more certainty around where the electricity will come from, and therefore the price of that electricity, because you reduce the amount of firming required. Next slide. So when we went out to tender, we had a really good understanding of what we're looking for. So we're seeking offers for long-term PPA, for renewably sourced electricity, and the LGCs that verify it's renewable. And we wanted that to be underpinned by renewable generation projects in Queensland, and more, preferably from North Queensland. Now, we actually timed the release of the tender for when there was a project that had been confirmed in our region. So I'd already spoken with a number of retailers and already knew when projects were in the pipeline and when they're likely to come on board. So the timing for us was quite important. And we were also preferring supply from a project or projects with the combined generation profile closely matching our load profile, which would ensure that sort of price certainty and hopefully lower prices because of the price certainty. So in the end, we received 7 tender responses. We received different pricing structures, and we needed specialist advice and analysis to enable us to make apples for apples comparisons. So, for example, we received an offer from a solar farm for which they could only guarantee the fixed volume, the fixed price of energy for a volume that was about 40% of our load. And the remaining 60% would be at a price that would vary year on year, depending upon what the firming energy was going to cost in the future. We also, had looked at options for the wholesale price pass-through option offered by Flow Power. And so, there's quite a lot of different ways the retailers will deal with that, the firming, and therefore the price can be quite a bit variable. So yes, definitely requires some specialist assistance to make an apples for apples comparison. Next slide. So in the end, we awarded our tender to Clenco, and what we've signed a deal with them, which is for a 10-year agreement to supply 100% renewable electricity to our 76 largest facilities. And the arrangement is a fixed price one where the electricity LGCs are fixed for that 10-year term, although they do escalate with CPI. The majority of the electricity, about 75%, will be coming from the Kaban Green Power Hub. And that's a 157 megawatt wind farm and battery project in our region. And that project was the cornerstone of the North Queensland Renewable Energy Zone, which was the first RES to be commissioned in Queensland. So being able to tie ourselves to this project and make an announcement that we were purchasing electricity from this was a great way for council to be demonstrating leadership and being involved in this renewable energy transition in our region. So we were the first organisation to announce a deal with Clenco procuring electricity from this project, and also the first local government to sign up for this type of PPA in Queensland or with Clenco. And that project is being delivered by Neoen, a major developer, and we've sort of been very mindful of understanding what are the environmental impacts and what they're doing to mitigate those impacts. Next slide. So you can see here's a quick map that shows Cairns. The Kaban Green Power Hub is 80 k's away to the south of us. Next slide. And the wind turbines are all delivered through the Cairns port. So it was also, quite a visible, prominent project that, had that sort of real local benefit in terms of economic benefits. Next slide. So that project's a $373 million project, supporting more than 250 jobs in our region. And Neoen had established mechanisms to deliver on the local benefits principles that have been established as part of the QRES project development. So the things that they were doing were they're paying obviously payments to landholders who are hosting turbines, but also providing benefits to neighbours who would be impacted by those turbines, even if they weren't on their land. They've also established a community benefit fund of $50,000 annually for a couple of decades. And they also had local participation plans that set targets for local employment, supply chain procurement, and Indigenous employment. Next slide. And of course, one of the important questions was, how does this stack up financially? There's no guarantees about what electricity prices will be in the future, but what we do know is electricity cost in this year is about 20% less than what we would be paying historically. And so the cost of renewable energy this year will be less than what we have ever paid. So it ticks a lot of boxes for everyone. Okay. And also the great benefit is, of course, the price certainty moving forwards to avoid that volatility.
And Daniel, what was the cost saving there, the dollar amount?
It's about 1.2 million for renewable energy. Yeah.
Great. Okay, thanks.
So through this contract, it'll enable us to sort of reduce up, for about 75% of our load to be supplied from renewables. There's a portion of electricity, about 25% that's still going to be supplied by Ergon. That's all our small sites. And so would need to buy LGCs to make that renewable. We're still going to install more solar behind the meter and look at other renewable energy technologies such as batteries and all that sort of thing. We're planning to electrify our fleet. So far we've got 4 EVs. Obviously we'll wait until prices are cost competitive with combustion vehicles, and we'll roll out more. But of course, as Jackie mentioned, one of the most important things is still to recognise that efficiency is important. But now, of course, it's really just that provides it's important from an operating cost reduction perspective, less so from an environmental perspective.
Brilliant. That's fantastic.
And that's it for me.
Thank you so much, Daniel. I know
Thanks.
you did that in record time. We could spend a lot more time asking questions and things and going through that. So if anyone does have questions for Daniel, please feel free to shoot those through. It's really valuable and really fantastic that you're able to share all of that experience with us, Daniel. So really, really much appreciated. So moving along then, we know people will need to get back to their daily jobs after this session. So we'll quickly talk a little bit about size options and buying. Next slide there, Bridget. Yeah, so obviously by this stage, you will each be aware that there is definitely a link between the type of PPA you might be looking at and your energy usage or load. So of course, if you're looking, if you're a smaller energy user, retail PPAs and LGCs, definitely opportunities there for you. If you're a large energy user, certainly you can also do a retail PPA, but you can also get a very cost competitive wholesale PPA at that upper end of the scale. Next slide. And that's why some organisations will look at group buying. And so group buying the way it works is a group of organisations will come together and pool their load and then go to market to obtain essentially greater impact and a better price. So increasing your purchasing power through a group purchase arrangement. They can take a little bit longer. There are some challenges. You need to agree sort of how you're going to make decisions when those tenders do come in, and how you're going to work together throughout that period. But they can be very impactful, and together a group may be able to support a full new solar or wind farm project, whereas alone you may be just off-taking from existing projects. So some great benefits there, reducing your risk, negotiating better terms, and sharing that workload and expertise. Another really appealing reason, particularly for councils, for grouping together. Some councils may have more resources than others to be able to focus on a renewable energy purchasing project, and same with organisations. Very quickly on the next slide, a couple of, before I introduce our next speaker, a couple of examples, and I won't talk to line because I'll let Tamara do that. But certainly lots of group examples, as I mentioned, by councils. Central West Joint Organisation, who just in fact won the local government award for their project last week. 11 councils in central New South Wales. They essentially had the central New South Wales region had 78% of their large sites and their street lighting included in this deal. They signed an 8-year contract with Iberdrola, which is an electricity retailer operating across the national electricity market. Commenced at the start of last year, and that PPA supported 2 wind farms, Bodangora and the Flyers Creek wind farms in New South Wales, reducing collectively their region's emissions by 20,000 tonnes of CO2 each year. So a great achievement there. So I will actually hand over now to, oh no, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. So before we hear from Tamara about the Lion Brewery and Simply Energy PPA, I will talk a little bit about community benefits in PPAs, which have really become incredibly important for organisations. We developed a couple of years ago a set of best practice principles to help organisations to understand how to do a really good PPA. And we developed these principles that you can see there on the screen, and a guide for sort of assessing your PPA purchase. So we believe that PPAs should support decarbonisation of the grid. Ideally, they should also support some further decarbonisation through projects such as storage projects. And thirdly, that they should support social, economic and environmental benefits of the region. So really important for energy buyers, not just the developers, to be interested in what's happening in those host communities in the regions. Next slide, Bridget. So we've got a really good example here. Westpac, in their PPA with Spark Infrastructure, they worked together with Beyond to deliver quite a wide range of community benefits via a 10-year PPA that they did for the Bowman Solar Farm near Wagga in New South Wales. So they worked with Spark and Beyond to deliver this $1 million local community support for the term of the contract. And it included an education program, a local biodiversity program as well, and regeneration projects for vegetation, planting some 5,000 trees. And they also did a whole lot of work with local graziers and also working with local native bee populations to improve the I guess the output of the landscape there also. So major tree planting initiative, as I mentioned, but importantly, employment and education outcomes. So as part of the contract, they required the developer to deliver 75% of the construction team as local employees. 15% of these were of Indigenous heritage and 50% were long-term unemployed. They also purchased over $12 million, I believe, in direct spend from local businesses, 90 local businesses in the region. And they also commenced the first Women in Solar initiative. And that's 12 local women were employed and educated at the local TAFE in working in this industry. So some really fantastic outcomes there. Thanks, Bridget. A couple of other really interesting and relevant community benefits that we've seen, and we've just put together a guide, which I'll come to shortly. In southwestern New South Wales, in the Southwestern Renewable Energy Zone there, the Hayes Shire Council has negotiated a really good outcome for the community there. They are delivering, or the French developer Engie is delivering 8 renewable energy projects there in that region, which is quite a burden, I suppose, on the region. And so really important that that community was engaged early and allowed to communicate what they wanted, I suppose, in return, in particular for shouldering that burden of the renewable energy transition. And so what was agreed was a $1,000 rebate per annum per household for households within 20 kilometres of the project. And that's for 30 years. So basically a financial return for the people of the Hayes Shire. Another project focused more on, I guess, community involvement in the governance of the community fund. Community funds are often managed by councils, but some of them have also been involving some of the regional communities as well as Indigenous communities. And this is for the Delacca Wind Farm that is owned by Octopus Investments in the Western Downs region. So the project will deliver community fund valued at $1.25 million over the length of this project. And community representatives, as I mentioned, will be involved in allocating that funding. Next slide. So we developed a guide, a little bit of guidance, I suppose, for organisations looking at sort of these best practice PPAs. And it's really for both corporate energy buyers and sellers. And what we wanted to do was set a standard for renewable energy delivery and performance on environment, climate, community, and organisational goals. And so what this tool does, and it's a really short little guide, it's about 10 pages long, it includes a whole range of case studies. A couple of them I've mentioned here just now. There are a whole lot of others there as well in there that are worth having a look at across those goals. And we prepared that together with WWF Australia and Energetics ERM. And I'll just give you a little snapshot now of what that looks like on the next page. So it's a tool that includes a whole range of parameters under each of those 4 areas. And it aims to give an example of poor, market standard, and best in market performance against each of those parameters so that you can start to, I guess, identify if you are going to market what it is that you would like to see in the tenders that are returned to you. It is true that if you're going for a larger energy purchase, and particularly a wholesale purchase, you might have a little bit more sway in these sorts of things. But certainly, even if you're going for a retail PPA or a smaller offtake, it's worth having a look at these and seeing what you might be able to include to encourage the suppliers to include some of these goals in some of the projects that they are contracting. So please feel free to take a look at that. That's on our website, and there'll be more on that in the guide that we're producing for the Queensland market. But now I'd like to hand over to Tamara. Tamara has joined us online. Thanks for your patience there, Tamara. Tamara Sling-Ronan is Environment Director at Lionco, and she's going to tell us a little bit about their PPA. Thanks, Tamara.
Hi, everyone. Hope you can hear me. Yeah, I just can't see your faces, so I'll assume yes.
Oh, hopefully you can see your slides, okay.
Yeah, I can see my slides, so
Fabulous.
that's good. Yeah.
That's good.
So first of all, thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk. And just at Lion, we are a beverage company, one of the lead.
I think you might have, there we go.
Yeah, something jumped off. And yes, so we currently operate, Lion is operated 3, just a short slide about Lion. We operated in 3 geographic locations, which is New Zealand, Australia, and the US. In total, we have 38 sites, roughly 4,000 people. Our net revenue was $3 billion this in F23, and 2.8 million was community investment for Australia and New Zealand. And again, below you can see the range of our product, which I think the most relevant for PPA Queensland is the Forex. If you want to try, I hope you've already tried it all. Cool, Jackie. So if you want to move to the next slide. So this is just a bit of a way at Lion will look as overhaul our Force for Good commitment. So part of our Force for Good, the sustainability, it's built out of 3 pillars, which is the ESG, environment, social, and governance. And environment, which is my team responsibility, we're looking onto zero carbon, which is moving towards a zero footprint across the entire value chain. We're looking into water stewardship, which is continue the effort to be world-class in water efficiency. And when we talk about water in brewing is a very high intensity water user. And then we're looking into our circular economy, which is the recycle and the recyclability content in our product, in our packaging, and the plastic pledge, which is looking at eliminate the shrink wrap by 2025. So this is something that we are aware that we may not meet that target. So this is a bit of a target that we're looking of pushing it a bit further. And then we have our social impact, which we talk about the responsible consumption, the inclusive, mental health. We're big partners in the Indigenous strategy. So for the reconciliation, so Lion is a big player in the ring, and diverse and ethical supply chain. And then everything is wrapped up with governance, which is safety our number 1 in the company. We're looking at policies, which is strategies and best practice and reputation. So again, we can do a lot of great things, but if we do a pollution and we're not meeting our ISO 14001 and we're polluting the river, everything we've done is useless. So it's making that governance in place. So if we'll go deep dive into the environment part, and that will be the next slide. So the way we tackle with the environment, and this is a bit deep dive looking into our target. So we are talking about 55% reduction in our scope 1, 2 emission by 2030. 30%, I do assume that everybody here knows the scope 1, 2, and 3, right? That's the basic. Yeah, cool. And then 30% reduction in scope 3 and net zero value chain by 2050. And all of those targets are science-based targets that's set up by our parent company, which is Kiwi. So how do we do it? So we are looking into new technologies. We supported the procurement of the PPA, and this is why I'm here presenting. Because Lion, we have moved to 100% renewable electricity for all our sites in Australia and New Zealand, which that helped us in roughly 60% reduction in a scope 1 and 2, which means we don't have any more scope 2 in Australia and New Zealand. Another way we tackle it, so our major issue now is the scope 1, is how we get rid of scope 1. So this is where we look at we have got like a bit of something which is called energy champion teams, which is across all the sites. And we're looking into other technologies, boil electrification, lightweighting of the bottles, and fleet electrification. Now we know that even though we are 100% renewable energy, electricity, we can't electrify everything, because that's big things which I'm sure you've already had a chat about that. It's the electricity available on the grid once everyone moving to electrification. And then with water, so water, we've got a bit of an aggressive target, which is 2.4 hectoliter by hectoliter. And this is meaning that all the water that's used to make a beer divided by the production volume that is of the product itself. So just, we used to be number 2 in Sydney water usage, for example, for TUI, for one of the biggest sites. And in Brisbane, the Milton brewery was in the top 10 users. So it's something that we're working hard, and we're looking into. We've just launched a new recycled water system in TUI's, in the site in Sydney. So that's the way we're going to tackle it. And then circular economy, which we are members of the APCO. So in APCO, the targets which looking for its recycled content by 50%, and recyclability 100%, and zero avoidable waste by 2025. So that's roughly what the environment team is looking at. So if we'll move to the next slide. So in Lion, we have 3 types in PPA. So I'm hoping I'm using, Jackie, the right terms. So we do have the on-site PPA, which is rooftop solars. So, and this is, it's the best way to tackle, if you look about, it's having your own in-house power station that can provide power energy, that can provide the energy to the site, but it's never enough. So we have, in a lot of our sites, we have rooftop solars, but we've found out that it doesn't give back it's not enough electricity. Then we have a sleeved PPA. So this is just for the New South Wales operation. So this was the first step when we started to look into a PPA. The first step, we've looked on a sleeved PPA, because we found it was easier to go into it. So we've joined forces with New South Wales, the BARS, and we did a bit of a group sleeved PPA, which provide us all the sites in New South Wales to be 100% renewable electricity. And since we saw that it was really working well, we've got the appetite to go more and quicker, because our target was to be in F25 100% renewable energy, but we've decided to push it 2 years earlier, because we saw the New South Wales gave us such a big benefit. And this one was a bit different. So this one was called the synthetic PPA. So what we've done here, we did a direct contract with the solar farm. So yeah, if we can move to the next one. Any question on these slides and how we are managing?
And just so that you know, a retail PPA is a sleeved PPA, same terminology.
Oh, sorry.
That's all right, no problem at all. And synthetic PPA is the same as a wholesale PPA. Industry uses lots of different terms, so we try and stick with those, but that's fine. Go ahead.
Yeah, I apologize.
Okay. No problem at all.
So yeah, so again, why we've decided to do it, and as I said, the first step was to have the solar panels, but what we found out, we're using 100 in Castlemaine, which is the brewery in Queensland, we're using 190,000 megajoule, and this one to make roughly 170 million liters of beer. And the solar that we've put on the roof only generated roughly 5% of the demand of the electricity. So we had to find a different way to tackle it. Again, roof solar was the easiest, and it's behind the grid. You get directly the benefits, but it wasn't enough. So if we go to the next slide, so the content, so why we wanted to go through, and this is the benefit that we started to see in the New South Wales PPA that we've done 1 year before. So again, we saw that it's a big GHG reduction from scope 2. What we've done with electricity, because the electricity prices are really changing, we've managed to lock good electricity prices. It's the only way we've realized that we can achieve the RE100. And again, biodiversity, it was good for wood projects. It's great for the branding and local construction and for the operational for those farms. So this is roughly a bit, what's the context and why we've done it. And I think it started to, from the big bubble, which is the biggest input that you can see, what's really helped us. But just to make sure, it's really important from a branding point of view, and again, from local constructions and companies, this is all the benefits that tidy up with the PPA. So if we'll go to the next slide, so the PPA procurement strategy. So the way we've done it, we started to look at a lot of projects. So there's a lot of projects on the market. And again, the evaluation criteria that we used was sustainability, the value for money, because still we're a company and we need to make a profit, flexibility, and additionality. Flexibility was really important for us. Again, if a company, we're growing up as a company and you're doing acquisitions, so you need to make sure you've got enough electricity if you buy and you do some more acquisitions. And again, the value for money was, I think, one of the biggest drivers. So what we've done when we looked at the synthetic PPA, we've used an outsourced company. So we did use EY to help us to look for project and to guide us which was the right project and available. And just to give you a bit of this process took us roughly around a year. It took us 7 months, even, it was a year from the start till we signed the contract. And in that time frame, we've looked roughly more than 30 projects to see if they are relevant or not. So it was checking the project to get the understanding if those projects will give us the right benefit, the cost pricing, and the size of the project. What we found out that a lot of the projects were not in the right size for us. So if we move to the next slide. So again, I think you probably talked about that earlier, so I don't want to just repeat about the pros and the cons. I think mainly the pros was, the PPA, it's the opportunity for the buyers, it's the renewable energy, it's to provide the financial hedge, against the historical volatility market of the electricity. The cons, you still got marketing price, the project risk, and the cash flow. So For example, for us, there was a bit of when we talk about project risk, the first year that we've done our synthetic PPA, the Waluga, the farm that we've chosen, was under flood. And it took us 4 months until we got the payback back from those 4 months. And that was a bit of, we've signed the contract, everybody were happy. And then January, we had a big flood there and half of the farm was not working. And it took them, a few months to get it all back again. But we knew that this is a risk that can happen. And we overcome that risk quite quickly. So if we go to the next slide, which I think talks about that, the Waluga farm that we've picked. So this was the farm that it's in Queensland, just above Brisbane, you can see in the map. The project itself generating 438,000 megawatt per year. We're roughly taking the offtake from Lion is roughly 70% at the first stage of the project. And this offtake is cover the Castleman Brewing in Brisbane, but it's balancing all our portfolio, excluding the New South Wales. So all our sites, all the other breweries that we've got in Victoria and in Tasmania are covered in this PPA. So this is where we're saying now we are 100% purchase electricity. So the New South Wales sites are in the retailer, and then everything else in Australia is covered with this with the Waluga farm. And that's a picture of the farm. So if we go to the next slide. So again, the lessons that we've learned from this. So the retailer PPA, which is the first stage that we've done, it's very convenient to start. And it did give us the appetite to continue and to go for the next stage. We've got greater benefit for the synthetic PPA, but it's more complex. It's really important to think that it's either you build the capabilities within your business or you're going to an external company to provide you all the support. We took the approach of build the capability in-house, and we worked really closely on this project with our procurement team. So our procurement team were heavily involved in the project of which farm to choose and worked with EY to get the right contract for the PPA. So that's really important. It's something to you as a company to make a decision whether if it's a small company, do you take it all outsource or do you build the capabilities in-house? And again, so with sustainability advisors, finance team, we had to educate the finance team, the treasury team. It was a big education piece, but it's something that we thought it was the best for us to do it in-house. And for the future, so again, business growth, we create more electricity, and this is why we went to this specific specific farm. So energy efficiency project free up electricity volume. So that's, again, it's something that when you purchase your contract with the PPA, it's need to think about the long term, because one of the biggest thing that we're looking, it's not just heavy to renewable electricity, we want to reduce the usage of the electricity. So again, it's all a bit of a trade-off. And then consider, what will place for the next LGC, beyond 2030. So this is a bit of it's a contract for 10 years. So we just need to start to understand and see where the market is taking us. And I think that's my last slide. I'm not sure. Yes.
That's it. Thank you so much, Tamara. That's really, really fantastic. And we've, in particular, apologies for not letting you know about those terms that we use, but it's important for people to, I guess, learn some of those other terms that are out there in industry anyway, because they float around. Thank you so much for sharing again, very generously, your experience at Lion with your PPAs. And Lion's has been a real leader in this space, so it's fantastic. Thank you again.
Yeah, thank you. And again, Jackie, if anyone has some questions about the process and what we've done, more than happy, to answer emails, you can reach out.
That's wonderful. Thanks, very
Okay.
generous again, Tamara.
See you. Bye.
Thank you. So fantastic. So we are just about at the end here. I'll just skip ahead, tell you a little bit about the bootcamp. We have gone a little bit over time. Apologies for that. If you have to go, that's fine. We'll send you the recording. We'll just skip to the next slide, Bridget. The bootcamp will, it's the Advanced PPA Training Workshop. We will be holding it over 1 to 1.5 days in March, April next year. We will go a lot more into detail in the various topics that we've sort of touched on a little bit today, and a bunch of others. Importantly, helping you to understand about PPAs, how they're different from what you're doing currently, and what the benefits and the aspects that you need to manage are, so that you can follow in the footsteps of the leaders that have spoken here today. We do bring along also some wonderful companies who generously give their time and talk about their PPAs. It's a great workshop, semi-structured, so you can ask a lot of questions that you might have, and to be able to learn from them. We will also have some people coming from councils that have led group processes, so really relevant to councils. It will likely be in Brisbane, but we haven't announced exactly yet where it will be, but it will probably be face-to-face. But please get in touch with us if you're interested. We will be letting everyone here know about it as well. We also have just a little feedback survey on the next slide. If you're able to just hover over that with your camera, that will take you to 3 quick questions. We'd love your thoughts on the session today, and your interest in PPAs helps us to deliver sessions to you and address your questions. Couple of comments there. Andrew, you've got a quick question there. When you go for an aggregate model, so group buying, what is a good annual consumption size to get started? I imagine having a small number of reasonably large users would be ideal. Yes, you're right, but it can be most helpful to go for the type of group PPA where you are similar organisations, or maybe you are grouped around a goal. There are a number of group PPAs such as Australian Hotels Association, others who have similar either procurement processes or goals out there in the market. There are a bunch of others out there that are more grouped. We've got the Melbourne examples, who were the first one quite different organisations, and the second one more similar in terms of load size. And there are a number of other group buying processes going on out there, involving smaller buyers with more sites. So there's a bit of a range out there, and Andrew, very happy to have a chat. Just feel free to reach out, and we'll have a chat about those with you. But everyone, if you could please thank our speakers today, our fantastic speakers. Thank you all so much for joining, and also for providing those questions. Again, we're very happy to answer questions. Thanks very much. Hope you enjoyed this session. And yeah, if you can applaud our wonderful team electronically, please do. Thanks again for joining the session.
Thanks all.
Take care.
Thank you, Jackie.
Cheers.
you.
Thanks,
Yeah.
everybody. Bye.